Wonderful. So thank you so much, everybody. Apologies. The joys of Microsoft Teams on a Sunday and the access that it provides or doesn't provide and issues signing in. So I'm going to be talking about data security, DLP. Don't worry if you don't know what DLP is, because you will know shortly for it. But data security is a really, really important topic, and it's not something that's new. So if we start off with going down what I like to refer to as memory lane. Yeah, I picked up this picture. It was like, old-fashioned sepia pictured stuff. So data leakage has been going on for a while, right? People write things down and then they carry them around. This particular item is, for instance, from a briefing that was given to a high-level government minister, who then was pictured walking down the street holding his notepad like this. Some photographers took a picture of it, blew it up, and then were able to see some information which probably should not have been particularly public for it. And look, we've all done stuff, we've left notepads lying around on our desk. Organizations clean desk policies. I know of an organization in which they actually issue covers that you can put over, so you don't need necessarily put your papers away, but sometimes organizations will require you to go ahead and actually put all papers into a safe for it if they are that sensitive for it. Now, this is, of course, what I refer to as being analog. What about digital data loss? Well, that's also been around for a while. The humble USB key, right? This is still possible to transfer more data than a high-speed internet connection. If I put data on a couple of hard drives and I drive to somebody for it, I guarantee you I can get the much more data there in that. And although loads of us nowadays, of course, use cloud capabilities, excuse me, USB keys are still somewhat common. Now, in the days before we had great high-speed internet connections for it, we used USB keys, USB drives to move data around, but these things are really, really small. And the number of people, who drop them somewhere, they were on the train, they slid out the pocket when you pull out your pass to do something, your keys. This was still a major problem for it, especially in the days before you could get encrypted USB keys. So data leakage has been around for a while. Now, how stop this? Well, organizations started putting policies in place that you weren't able to plug USB keys in and you weren't able to transfer data onto them. The system, even though it was plugged into USB, just wouldn't recognize them. In fact, an organization nowadays block it as default usually, and all sorts of alerts come up if you try and plug it in. They're worried about data exfiltration. Forwarding emails, you may not be able to forward emails. You can mark emails as sensitive and not be able to copy data out of them, leaving aside actually go ahead and forward them. And then we had this marvelous thing called the cloud. Now, I am old enough to remember days when people would not refer to the cloud. People had no idea what the cloud is. But when we talk about the cloud, right, and nowadays we use it's a SaaS product, it's software as a service, or it's infrastructure as a service. It's somewhere in the cloud, but we're not talking about those lovely white fluffy things in the sky, or where I am in London, the quite grey things outside. Though actually today looks like it's going to be a nice day for it. Your data is not actually just floating around there. It has a terrestrial home. It's stored somewhere. In fact, not just one place, but lots of places on a network of servers. And when you access it, when you put data there, it goes and finds and delivers it for it. Obviously, we are usually nowadays quite familiar with the cloud, right? We're all using cloud platforms. Microsoft is cloud first. They used to refer to as the three clouds. You had Azure, M365, and business applications. Nowadays, for the last couple of years, it's been the one cloud. But people still blithely do stuff with their data. And you need to think about how and what do they do with their data? How are they sending data? Who are they sending data to? How are they controlling the access to the data that they are sending and they are using? Backups. Where are you actually putting your backup? Now, Microsoft in general has some marvelous capabilities around this. The whole geography remit for it. The data do not cross geographical boundaries. So if you're in the European data centers, it doesn't get sent to America. If you're in the Far East data centers, again, it doesn't get sent to Europe for it. But that's how Microsoft handles data. However, you still can have users, right? If I have data and I attach an Excel spreadsheet of something, with leads or opportunities, and I can go ahead and I can, send it out. I can email it to anybody in the world if there are no controls around it. If I build a Power App, I can connect into data. I can do stuff with data and push into different places, right? We have over 1,100 connectors available now through Power Apps. So data is really, really important to keep in mind. And with the cloud, it just opens things up to a whole new level for it. So along came Microsoft and went, right, we need to put some controls over there. And I'm going to be specifically looking at how Power Platform, which includes Dynamics 365, how it handles this. So what exactly is DLP? So DLP stands for Data Loss Prevention. Personally, I think the L should possibly be leakage, because it's about not necessarily actively losing stuff, but leaking things by mistake for it. And what I'm going to be talking about is how the Power Platform, so Microsoft Business Applications Platform, handles DLP. I'm also hopefully going to actually do a live demo, just showing you a couple of things which you may not be aware of when it comes to this. So the first thing to understand is, where is your data? Because your data as an organization could be across many, many different places. Some could be internal systems, some can be external systems. In fact, when I go in to talk to organizations, I don't say, let's talk about apps or automation. I say, let's talk about your data. The data is the most valuable thing that an organization has. Once you identify where your data is, you can then identify how people have access to the data. You can start breaking down silo of data as well. Just because you have 10 applications doesn't mean you should have 10 different data silos. But you understand how and what you do with your data, how you structure your data. And once you've got that in place, what you then do is you work out what applications you put on the top, what automations you put on the top, what security you put on the top. And of course, last but absolutely not least, what governance and security you put on the top. Just because you have access to data doesn't mean you should be free to do everything that you want. And I like to refer to as data in different places as your data islands. Hence why I've got a picture of a island complex up. This is actually a futuristic complex that is being planned near to Singapore. Lots of different islands, different functions on to be able to go in between them for different things. Because just because you have data and you're able to share it, again, doesn't mean you put it in a single place. Because although you may have your Microsoft stack for data, you may have other places. Well, even in the Microsoft stack, right, you're going to have various Azure data residencies. You're going to have various Power Platform Dynamics 365 environments. Each environment is its own data silo, essentially, although it can connect into other places, M365 data. But you may also be connecting in to other Microsoft services, non-Microsoft services. If you're running SAP for your ERP purposes, that's going to be a data silo for it. Organizations using Dropbox to store documents, that's also a data silo. So many, many different data places that you've got in place. But how do you get access to all these different data places? Well, within Power Platform, we have the wonderful things of connectors, and I like to look at connectors as bridging them. Now, when Power Platform initially came out, there were just a handful of connectors available. In 2018 or so is when Power Platform was sort of released. Obviously, that was quite a while ago in there. But Microsoft has not stood still, right? The number of connectors is growing exponentially. Pieter, who is a good friend of mine, actually has an automation around it to check when he puts on Twitter, or rather X as it's now called, when a new connector is released. In fact, the average time for a new connector to be released is about 4.5 days. I do say that's average time. Sometimes don't see a new connector for a week or two. Sometimes can see multiple connectors within a single day. But Microsoft is releasing many, many more connectors. In fact, it's possible to go ahead and create your own connector and submit it to Microsoft for it. I'm not talking about custom connectors, which is only used within your own organization, but I know of ISVs that create connectors to data and go ahead and put it out there. It has to go through a certification process by Microsoft, but it goes out there and is then available. It's marked as third party. But with all these connectors comes security risk, because if you've got a connector there that's not secured, people could use it. And if they're connecting to the wrong systems, or they're holding data that's sensitive, they could push it out to a place where it's not properly able to be. It shouldn't be there from a governance perspective for it. Now, in terms of connectors, in a way that I'm talking to a somewhat global audience, connectors can also be regional based. So if you're a multinational global organization, just because you may have a connector available in one of your tenants or one of your geos doesn't mean it's available in another one of your geos. So Again, this adds a little bit of complexity on it. It's important to bear in mind from a development perspective, if you've developed something in one geo, you want to deploy it to another geo, the connector just may not be available for it. But connectors are the bridges. They connect you from point A to point B. And as we know with Power Apps, with Canvas apps, we can use multiple connectors in a single Canvas app. The same is true in Power Automate. We can use multiple connectors in a single Power Automate. In fact, that's really the whole point of Power Automate, right? To connect into one system, go ahead and automate something, connect into another system, go do something there, and so on and so forth. A good example of this, I know of an airline in America that is monitoring Twitter, or X. I still refer to it as Twitter most of the time, for tweets out to them, right? Customers, as we well know, are quite vocal on social media across a wide number of different organizations. And what they do is they connect in to X, and any tweet that's sent to them, they pass through sentiment analysis. And if the sentiment analysis is neutral or negative, it's not about a positive experience with that airline, it goes away and it creates a customer service case for a customer service agent to reach out to the user account and try and work out what went wrong and what they could do better for it. They're connecting into multiple systems there, right? They're connecting into X, they're connecting into Azure because they're using sentiment analysis as part of Azure Cognitive Services, and they're connecting into Dataverse. 3 different places. Now that's quite a harmless item 4, right? There is no personal information, at least not at that point, right? You have the user account that's gone and done the tweet in the first place, but you haven't really got anything more in terms of, personal data. So this is important to keep in mind. Lightweight scenario, but it's fine. But the important thing to start thinking about is how do you handle your data for it? Now, organizations have different ways of doing this, right? Organizations could say, you know what, everybody could just have access to every single piece of data, no matter how sensitive it is. Don't think they're going to get very far in today's security and governance driven world for it, or the security controls you need to have in place. So part of what you need to do is your data estate, and again, there's a much wider data estate here than I'm addressing necessarily today for it, but you need to allow access to the right data sources. You need to be in control of it. Data will exist in various systems. Data will be sent and received to and from other systems for it. But you need to work out what data should be exchanged with which system, the concept of having a system being authorized to send or receive data. And obviously, to prevent sensitive data from leaving your organization. Now, when I'm doing a presentation like this in person, and I've got a room there, I go ahead and say to the room, right, who thinks it's a good idea for people to have access to payroll? And people go, well, probably not. Might be a good idea to see salary ranges, but actual payroll figures, no, that's sensitive information. I go, okay. But what happens if you build a Power App? If you've got access into for whatever reason, you've got access into payroll, and you build a Power App, Power Automate Flow, and you connect to the payroll system to do some automation, to do some interfacing. They go, yeah, okay. And I go, and what happens if you then connect that to Twitter or to X and you decide to publish that information externally? Who thinks it's a good idea? I have not to date yet found anybody who thinks that that's a good idea. In fact, that's probably a grievous violation and subject to firing and legal action taken against that person. Its payroll is obviously very, very sensitive information and not something which we want to leak out. So we need to work out what systems we got in place, which systems can talk to each other, but also who has access to those systems, who can do what. Because as a user in my organization, I may need access to very sensitive data as part of my role. That's fine, that's my role. But I should be restricted in what I can do with that to ensure that it doesn't leak by mistake. I know I'm saying mistake, I'm not trying to accuse anybody of being malicious at all, although there are, of course, lots of stories out there about malicious actors there. Now, when it comes to Power Platform, there are 2 approaches to data security from a governance perspective. The first one is you take a look at a tenant level. As the name suggests, you can control everything that happens within the tenant. Now, in order to be able to govern this, you need a global role, one of the M365 global security roles. You need to be a global admin, in which you've got the keys to the kingdom, or a Power Platform administrator. And at that point, what you're able to do is you're able to go ahead and configure tenant level policies. Now, when you configure a tenant level policy, you can select a single environment, you can select multiple environments, you can select all environments. You can say you want it to apply naturally to all environments except ones that you specify. You can say you want to only apply to specific environments for it. But anybody who is a tenant admin or a Power Platform admin has one of those global M365 security roles for it, can view these policies, can modify the policies, can create and delete the policies for it. Now, obviously, within organizations, it's not usual for a large number of people to go ahead and have these roles. But again, you can't say EY should have that, but Shakir should not be able to have that. If we've both got the same roles, we can go ahead and put these in place for it. And what will happen is when it's in place, and again, I'm going to do a demonstration of this, it will go ahead and it will apply it. Everything will start falling under the policies for it. Okay, but what happens if we want to delegate some access to people with a slight, not access, but delegate control of this to a slightly lower level, whereby you may not need one of those global roles? Well, that's fine. We have the ability to do it using an environment level approach for it. If you are a system administrator in an environment, you have access to environment level policies. Now, if you have the ability, if you're a system administrator and you have the ability to do this, when you create a DLP policy, it will only apply to the single environment. What this means is you have to recreate this for every single environment you may want to. You may have some tenant level roles and environments and policies that are going on, but you may also want to be more prescriptive within specific environments for it. Now, when you go ahead and create this, because you're creating it for a specific environment, you have to specify an environment, and it's only a single environment, as I said, although I believe the functionality is coming in soon that Microsoft will actually give you the ability to essentially copy across to different environments. Now, you don't need to be the global administrator, one of the M365 administrators, where the Power Platform or global tenant admin, to be able to create this. You just need to be the system administrator. You do have access as the system administrator to all the tenant level policies that are in place. You can only, however, view them. You cannot create any tenant level policies. You cannot modify any tenant level policies, but you can see what's there. You can go ahead and create your own environment level policies. As a tenant admin, so that global admin or the Power Platform admin, those global roles for it, you can view environment level policies that are in place as well. So you have visibility both ways. You can also modify them and you can create them. Amusingly, you cannot actually create an environment level policy if you hold a tenant level role, though. You need to apply the local environment admin role and then drop your global role. This is, to me, very annoying. I have fed this back into Microsoft as something that they could do something better about for it. I would expect to go ahead and say, yep, Shakir.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what the point you are raising. Yeah, it's quite annoying. Exactly.
Yeah, I engage with the governance team quite regularly. I have said it would be nice to turn around and go, I need to drop my global role. I should be
Yes,
able to go ahead and select what type of policy I want to create. It's
true.
it's a it's a niggling stuff at the moment, as far as I'm
Exactly.
aware. At some point, it may come into place. Now, I keep talking about these policies, but how do these policies actually go ahead and work? Well, I like to refer to them as swim lanes. We have three buckets. I prefer the word swim lane to bucket, right? We have a business lane, we have a non-business lane, and we have a blocked lane. Now, blocked is probably self-evident. If you put something in there, it is blocked. It's not able to be used. That's fine. Whatever environment it applies to will block it. So you're not able to use that connector. It will say you cannot select it, you cannot use it. But what's the difference between business and non-business? Well, the name's actually arbitrary. It used to be you could rename them. Microsoft took out that functionality a little while ago. It would be nice if they came back. But essentially, it means you can interact with everything within your lane, right? If you are literally in the swimming pool and you see other swimmers in your lane, you could talk to them, you could say hello, you could stop to talk. Anybody in the lane next to you, you've got no idea about them. So for instance, in the business one over here, and these are just some conceptual logos that I've put in there, we've got OneDrive, we've got Exchange, we've got SharePoint, we've got Power BI. And in the non-business lane, we have Gmail, we have Weather, we have Dropbox, we have Bing Search, a variety of other Google services as well. You cannot mix and match across these. Applications and automations, which I'll show in a moment, They do not exist. You cannot combine them together for it. So what this does is this allows you to specify your data. If you look at your data source, you say, oh, my business data is in Microsoft. So any Google services we don't use for business purposes, and I'm not going to allow any Google services to interact. So my Google services could be in non-business, or my Microsoft stuff is in business. I don't need to worry that somebody's going to push out to Gmail something, or say social media is in non-business as well. Somebody can connect into my business systems and push out onto a non-business system. This is how it groups. This is how it is blocked. Now, in the early days of DLP, when Microsoft released this, it was an all or nothing, right? You had a connector. We all know connectors. Hopefully, we've used the connectors for it. And that was it. You could enable a connector, or you could block it. But all the actions within the connector was applicable, whether you allowed it or did not allow it. But then what Microsoft put in place a year or two back was the ability to have granularity in place. And what this allowed you to do is see every action in the connector, and you're allowed to select them. This was really important because we had scenarios where marketing teams, for instance, right? If an organization say you can connect to Twitter or X, right? And that's fine, but marketing may want to do so. You may need to bring information in, right? You're connecting to LinkedIn, and marketing and sales needed to connect in there. So what you could do here is you could say, you know what, I want to be able to read from it, but I don't want to write back to it. And you have the granularity in place. You also have the option to say, as new functionality is released, because we have no control over when Microsoft releases new functionality, it just turns up and doesn't even knock on the door, it just enters and is there. You have the ability to specify whether you wanted to default block new actions in the connector or allow them. Most organizations, when they're starting to lock down this much, went ahead and said we're going to block them for it. Now, what's the aim of this overall? We've got our connectors, we can do the actions. How do we handle this in place? Well, there are many different scenarios that organizations want to be able to have in place. And what we could do is we could put something bespoke. Here's a birthday cake my wife made for my eldest daughter a year or two back, right? Absolutely bespoke cake. She said she wanted a unicorn cake with sort of a rainbow feature for it, and that was fine. My wife went ahead, she spent quite a bit of time. She quite likes cake making for it. But we can tailor, we don't need to use the out-the-box functionality and say, that's it. You're an organization, this is the way it's prescribed for you. We're able to create bespoke for each and every organization, and we're able to put different layers in place. So each organization can use the tools and say, right, what's our approach as an organization? What's our approach to using our different systems? What do we allow and what do we not allow? Microsoft provides the capabilities around this, but does not prescribe how it's being used. Now, part of this will require environment strategy approach, right? Who are your users? Who are your user personas? Ensure that you do this. I'm going to be talking about how this actually works in practice and show you in a moment. You need to go ahead and group this. But for example, if you've got what I still refer to as citizen developers or makers who are new to things, you want to ensure that they're locked down, have a place in which they can play and lock it down appropriately. Don't put your professional developers and all your business systems and your citizen developers all into the same environment. It's just not going to work for them. So environment strategy actually is a massive input that needs to go into, and organizations need to look into, in order to handle data security. Now, when you go ahead and implement this, some important information that's very, very important to know. Hence why I've got the warning sign here. So the first thing is, if you have different policies, right, you can create almost as many policies as you want to have. Haven't actually yet come across a limit, but you can create many different policies and layer them on. The most restrictive approach applies. Unlike licensing or security roles, right? If you create two dataverse security roles, one gives you access to accounts and one does not give you access to accounts, and you apply those security roles to a user, the user has access to accounts. It's the highest level of security. With DLP, it's not. It's the most restrictive approach. If I have a DLP policy that allows me Facebook and a DLP policy that blocks me from Facebook, I'm blocked from Facebook. What you can do, however, is you can tailor your policies as needed. Now, the important note as well is Power BI also has DLP in place, except Power BI is not run, as with many other things, is not actually run through the Power Platform Admin Center for it. It's handled through Microsoft Purview. Important to note, right? Because you can do stuff within Power BI, but the security for that, the DLP, is handled elsewhere. So that is also important to note for this. The next important thing, it applies immediately. Now, it's actually officially an async process. I'm going to demonstrate this to you live, just how quickly this goes into place. And when you go ahead and you put something in place, it will then go ahead and suspend things. If you've got a Power Automate flow, you will get a lovely email to turn around and go, it's suspended for it. But what does this actually look like from a business impact? And then a bit later, I'm going to talk about, I've got about 50 minutes left, I'm going to show you how you can minimize impact, hopefully, for it. So how does the business impact work? So the first thing is makers, people who are creating things for it, right? If you are trying to use a connector, it will give you a warning message. It will give you an error, say this cannot go ahead and be used. If you have an app, Power App, right, that violates the policy, you cannot save it. So if you're in there, if a policy has been implemented, so you've got a Power App, you've got different connectors in place, and then a DLP policy comes down, right, and it goes ahead and it's applied, you need to go back into it. You need to ensure that it's compliant with the DLP policy. You cannot save it if it's got a conflict in place. Power Automates, you can save, but they are automatically suspended. They will not execute that's there for it. So you can still build Power Automates, but you cannot run them. Power Apps, however, you cannot build and save. It will not allow you to do it. What about the actual runtime? Well, that's also impacted. If a DLP policy is in place, then at that point, you will not be able to launch the app. You will get an error message. It used to be a very generic error message. Nowadays, it actually tells you some more. It tells you what DLP policy, and then you can go and try and work out who to contact to talk to them about how and why and what you need to mitigate with it. If it's for Power Automate, it suspends it. Now, the impact of this, right? Power App, okay, Power App, of course, can be important, right? We all use Power Apps. Power Automate, you can bring an organization to its knees. I have seen it done for it because it will immediately suspend it. So you need to think about how you go ahead and do this. And again, I'm going to show you in a moment or so some things around this. Now, if you are new to DLP, you need to think about how you go ahead and implement it. And it can seem quite complex. I mean, it's an intuitive, mostly intuitive interface. There are some additional tools in the Center of Excellence toolkit, one of which I'm going to show you for it. But if you're new to DLP and you're working out setting DLP, how can you go ahead and work it out? Well, you may have people in your organization already know about DLP, right? I mentioned Power BI. Power BI has been around, of course, for a while. Power BI people, Power BI security and governance people are usually quite familiar already with DLP. And therefore, when I say if you're new to Power Platform or you're new to setting up DLP with the Power Platform, go talk to whoever's running security and governance around Power BI, because the likelihood is they are going to be able to help you. Possibly they could form part of the team for working out the approach to going away and using it. So what I'm now going to try and do is a demonstration. So if you just wait for one moment, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flick over to a demonstration window. Boom! This is one that I created earlier for it. So what this is this is a Power Automate flow. So I'm just going to edit the flow. And it's a really, really simple flow. I could do this in an app base. I'm going to manually trigger it and it's going to go ahead and get my current weather. So this is using the weather connection. If I hover over it, is it going to tell me? No, but anyway, it's using the weather. There we go, my connection, MSN weather. So this is a Microsoft provided service. So manual, test, get current weather, run flow. It ran. It's running. It ran successfully. Boom, done. What is the current weather? Great. Let's see, mostly cloudy. Well, got some gardening to do later on today, so hopefully that goes. Right, and that runs. Okay, let's go back. Let's just go ahead and see this. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to look at all my runs because I can resubmit. And then it will run for it. Right, that's there. Refresh that. Maybe that should refresh. No, but I went back to the main screen. Okay. Anyway, you can see that it goes ahead and it's running this. Okay. So you click run at the top. run flow, done. Okay, fine. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm now going to go and take a look at my DLP policy. So if you just give me one moment, I'm going to go ahead and bring up my DLP policies. So here's my DLP policies for it, right? All of mine are, my scope is a tenant level. I don't have any environment level that's there. So I've got a test policy. So I'm just going to click edit policy. And this goes through all the same steps as doing a policy, right? I've got a policy name. These are my buckets for it. Ooh, over 1100 up to almost, yeah, well, over 1160 because I've got 3 in blocked. Right, I've got AccuWeather that's there. I have nothing in business. But what happens is I'm going to go ahead and specify this. So I'm going to search for weather. And I'm now going to go ahead and I'm going to go block. Right, custom connectors. I'm not going to do anything around at the moment for it. Here's my scope. So actually what I'm going to do is I've got exclude certain environments, which means they'll apply to all environments except the ones that I exclude. So we put that on there. It's going to say ones that excluded from. I can say I want to add multiple environments, so which ones is going to be applicable to, or just apply to all environments. Incidentally, important to note here, if you add to all environments or you exclude certain environments, any new environment created will automatically fall under it. We'll leave it as that. That's fine. So it's going to exclude. I'm going to click next. Now, let's just see if I can. Oh, hold on, that just exited the full screen. Not what I wanted to do. Give me one moment. There we go. Right, so I've got my policy here. And the reason I'm trying to resize this is I'm going to try and bring up. No, that was not the right one. Give me one moment. So that is my policy. Okay, hold on. I'm just going to open this again in a new window. There we go. Right. Because officially, according to Microsoft documentation, this is an async process. But there's been a disconnect. Right, let's just go to make.powerapps.com. So let's maximize this for a moment. Just want to find out where my flows are. There we go. Button get current weather. So let's go into there. Right, in fact, on the policy, I just realized I'm actually excluding this from the policy. So I just actually going to say I'm going to go ahead and apply this to all my environments. Right. Okay, so I've got this here on the side. I'm going to click run flow. It's running, run flow. It's running. Officially, Microsoft documentation says applying a policy is an async process that can take up to 24 hours. So I'm now putting one in blocked. Going to go away, policy updated. What this should be doing, and there we go. That took about 3.5 seconds. This flow is currently turned off. Cannot run my flow. If I refresh this, it's going to go ahead and go, right. Let's go back, come on. There we go. It's suspended. Why is it suspended? I've got my admin policy. It's restricting this. And this is how you can bring a system to its knees if you're not careful around this. Now, you know, when I went ahead and set it up, right, it didn't turn around and say it's going to impact anything. Okay, fine, you know something, we're going to go ahead, right? We need to go ahead and modify the policy. So we're going to allow it to be used again. You know, we blocked this by mistake. So we've got MSN weather, and we're going to go ahead and say, you know, something, let's go ahead and move to non-business, right? Quickly, let's get this back. We've got a system going down, right? All environments, update policy, doom. Right. So policies updated, and let's go ahead, let's turn on the policy. Come on, go. Right, button, get current weather. Status, it's off. Why is it off? I just turned it on. I'm at least 5 seconds later for it, right? Turn on. No, right. Let's go ahead, let's run flow. Ooh. And it would appear that Microsoft has actually done some improvements in this, because the last time I did this, It's an async process. It can actually take up to it's nice they've actually improved this. It can actually take up to 24 hours to unblock this, right? Which means that you can take time, although it seems Microsoft has now done a lot of work around this, which is quite nice. So when I demoed this a couple of weeks ago, again, it can take up to 24 hours. Putting the policy in place, I've never seen it take longer than 10 seconds, even across a tenant with dozens or hundreds of environments in place and the collateral. Unblocking it, removing it, even in a lightweight environment, I've seen take up to 24 hours, but it seems Microsoft has actually done something around this, which is, let's face it, actually quite nice. But again, we have the problem, right? If we're going into things, how do we go ahead and work out what the impact is going to be? Because we can't see how it's impacting. So we have this wonderful thing in the Center of Excellence toolkit. And what this is this called the DLP editor, currently in version 2. Now, this is a canvas app. This is provided by the Microsoft PowerCat team and allows us to go, we can see all our policies, right? So we've got our policies in place. So we can go to it. Let's get the test policy that's up there. Again, it walks through all the same information, right? What's non-blocked, what's business, right? All the information, although that interface has a slight problem for it. There we go, MSN weather, because they moved to blocked. So if we block the weather again, same policy for it. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the scope. So I want to add all environments, next, right? And then it goes ahead and does a check. This is not done by the out-the-box tooling. You can see it's looked at the Power Automate flows. It's looked at the Power Apps, and this will tell us that it's going to impact on it. Essentially, this says you're going to bring this to its knees. It's going to stop working for it. We can export this to a CSV. We can see who the owner of it is, which obviously is myself because I did it. We can click create an email, right? It does not comply. This is very helpful, right? It will tell us what the details are for it. Now, this does require the Center of Excellence toolkit to be installed, because what this is actually reporting on the underlying data that it's got in place. It runs approximately once every 24 hours. It pullbacks all the Power App, Power Automates, environments, all of that wonderful plethora of information. And it also analyzes the connectors for it. So what this will do is this will say, this is an impact analysis. Now, because it's running on the data that the COE has in place, at that point, if you've built something within the last 24 hours that has not yet been picked up, it will not show up in this. So it's not an absolutely perfect solution, but as long as you're reporting across all of your environments, you will be able to see essentially what you can bring to its needs, what you can bring down from a system perspective. Because the last thing you want to do is have a Power Automate flow, for instance, that's very crucial, very small, hidden away somewhere in a production environment, but that's used for critical data and to bring it down. As I said previously, that's in that demo just there, it came back up really quickly. Previously 24 hours, you can think of the impact that you can have. So I definitely recommend going ahead and using this when you're thinking of it. In fact, when you're going ahead and you're implementing DLP and looking at the right, we have over 1,100 connectors. At least I'm showing 1,162 or 63 in my own environment here, although that number again may vary based on where you are in the world. But what's your approach to it? Now, organizations that I've engaged with goes, well, we have to review each and every single one. I go, not necessarily. Look at your most critical items. What are you using for your business data and your secure data? Go and put that into business. Then work out what you want to be blocked that you don't want people to use at all. Although if you've already got your business systems in your business bucket that you've got here, right? If we go ahead and, take a look at the connectors and the different areas that we've got in place for it, you're already protecting your business data. It's then just a matter of if you want your users to have other stuff. So then work out what you want to block and work out if you need to be granular for actions. And again, just work out how you go ahead and apply it, because you can have different environments and apply different policies in place across them. And this is, again, really, really important to understand. You need to layer. You don't just put a single policy in place. Some policies you may put in at a tenant level, blocking, for instance, social media. Although, again, you just need to think about, hold on a moment, do you need to exclude your marketing aspects, right? You may want to go out and, promote things on social media for it. So you need to put exceptions in place for it. So you really do need to think about layering. And this is something that builds and builds over time. So I always say take a soft approach to it. Don't just go overboard and block everything that you're not using for a business just because you don't need to. And make sure that you use the DLP editor, because that's really, really important. So with that, I just want to open up and see if there are any questions from anybody around it. We skipped all through.
There is no question particularly, but it's quite interesting because I have been into this DLP discussion because as a kind of implementer and developer, so the administrator and the guys who are managing the environment, somehow they blocked one of our connectors, which is quite important. Though
Yep,
if there's a connector which makes a the postman, like sorry, the we want to make a API call. So there's a
yep,
HTTPS connector which makes a call to the calling an API, and then they just blocked it for some odd reason.
yep,
And then we have to give them the whole the clarification and justification that okay, we are using for this and that and it is not going outside. Yeah, so I think that's a very cool topic, and usually as from the developing background, so we don't focus on these topics like DLP, and but it's quite important, and it can stop you working for weeks if
yep,
the people are not happy with as you said with the Twitter, right? Twitter X. So if they are not happy that okay, you are tweeting out from the system or you are consuming
yep,
these information, so they just block you out, and then you have to talk to your manager, director, and then just try to convince them.
yep,
Yeah, but that's a really cool topic. Yeah, that's a really cool topic.
yep.
Uh,
Legal
yep.
people usually go, no, no, block as default. Don't allow
Yes,
anything as a default for it until we receive an exception and a business justification for doing so.
exactly.
And compliance people are usually, sitting quite close to legal and go, right, okay, so we do that, but they don't look at the impact for it and they don't think of the
Yes.
wider item. It's like, by default, we do not allow. But as
And
I said, and again, social media is a really good example of this,
yes.
right? Most organizations want to block social media. You don't want to put
Mm,
sensitive information out there. But what about your marketing efforts, right? People put, HR, they're going to be
yes.
engaged on X or Twitter. They're going to be engaged on LinkedIn. They may be engaged on Facebook. They may have
Yes.
reasons for it. If you just block as default, you could stop
Mm.
what they've actually got in place already.
Yeah, I think the approach I found from the organization, so they don't want to discover that what these connector has been using from the development parts, from the application itself. So they could be numerous application there, and those application can be using one of those connectors. So what they do, as this is my experience, it may not happen everywhere, that they first block it and then they try to find that okay, who is making who's screaming and who's shouting that okay, my workflow suddenly stop working,
Yep.
and then you just need to you won't from as I mentioned from the development background, you won't go into the phase that okay, it can be blocked from the DLP side. You just thinking about that okay, something with my flow, and then it just doing something, or if I have written some faulty flow that this connector is not working. But at the end, once we figured out that this has been blocked from the with this DLP.
Yep. And again, it used to be when it was blocked, it would bring up a really, really generic message. And then
Yes.
about a year or so, Microsoft actually updated it so you could see why it was being blocked because you didn't know
Mm,
what it was
exactly.
about. Now at least you do.
Exactly. That's really good. That's really good. Thanks, Kalman. Thanks for speaking to our event. And yeah, I think it's very early at your end, right? 8 o'clock somewhere.
Yep. Brilliant. Thank you
We,
so much for the
we,
opportunity. Really happy to come along here.